Welcome to Business Leader Breakthroughs, where we help unlock the potential in you, your teams, and your business. I'm your host, Ryan Castle, along with Dr. Mike Ashby. We'll share insights, experiences, and stories on achieving breakthrough success in business and life. In addition to a podcast, The Breakthrough is a coaching and advisory business that provides programs for business leaders, owners, and managers to develop your skills and capabilities to boost your business and enjoy a better life. To learn more, click the link in the episode show notes or go to thebreakthrough.co. Now let the breakthroughs begin.
Hi there, Mike Ashby. Welcome to this week's podcast. I'm joined by Ryan, my business partner and good friend. We're going to talk about learning. It's something that we've been working on, particularly in these last 18 months or so while we've been developing the Active Manager program. And it's been really interesting about, and I guess it reflects stuff that we have known and accumulated over the years, but it's coming together and we're, I suppose, developing a bit of a formula around that. And we want to talk today about kind of how you know you're learning, what learning feels like, and how you know you're kind of making your way through the learning progress.
And how hard it is.
And why it's meant to be.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, we'll explain why it's so hard.
Yeah.
Doing the same old, it's pretty easy.
Yes. And our brains, our brains are actually geared to manage energy. They use 75% of the energy we use in a day. So our brains get very good at preserving energy. One of the ways, and so because when we're learning, we're creating new neural pathways, that takes energy. So our brains try to avoid it. Our brains look for what's familiar so that we can go back to doing what we've always done. That's why it's hard to change, is because our brains go, oh, I don't like this is too much hard work. I want to go the path of least resistance. Doesn't matter whether it's wrong. It's the path of least resistance and it's familiar and it preserves energy, and that's my number one job. So that's kind of in a nutshell why learning is hard. Where do we start? I guess if we start with, we were talking about the process from unconscious incompetence through to unconscious competence, the stages of learning.
Yes.
And the unconscious incompetence is we don't know what we don't know.
Absolutely. I was thinking about this in the context of breathing well. So breathing just as something we do, we don't have to think about it. Yeah. It just happens. It's a brilliant habit. It's something we know right from...
Quite important.
It's very important, quite vital.
Yep.
A big difference between simply breathing and breathing well.
Yes.
And when we're unaware of what breathing well looks like, then we're definitely in the unconscious incompetence. So we don't know what we don't know. It's just kind of happening naturally. We're not really thinking about it. When you learn more about breathing, the effect that it has on your physiology, the effect that it has on your mental capacity, you understand that breathing through your diaphragm and through your nose and all these other elements, and you go, oh, I was never really aware of that. I just thought I just kind of breathed, so we can step through the ladder. And when we take that next step from unconscious incompetence through to conscious incompetence, that would be when we start learning that some of these other breathing techniques are important and valid. They're not habit yet, we don't really know how to do them properly, and we have to go through this learning path of getting there.
That's right.
Then as we understand those and get better, we might be able to practice those. We might be able to practice them for 5 minutes at a time by giving it conscious effort. And that's where we move into conscious competence. When we kind of know what we're doing, but it still takes quite a lot of focus for us to get it done. And then if you get very good at it, we turn it into habit, and we're into that fourth stage of learning, being the unconscious competence, where we've moved into a new phase of we can do that good breathing very, very well.
Yep.
But we don't have to think about it anymore.
Yep. Well, quite a long time ago now, I went to the GP, and my GP looked at me and said, you don't breathe properly. And he was just looking at how I was breathing in my chest and quite shallow, and I was tired, I was kind of struggling to get my breath and those kinds of things. And I did that process. I went to see somebody and they helped me learn to breathe better, which sounds odd. Yeah, and another example that I often use with that one is learning to drive.
Yes.
Before you learn to drive as a teenager, you don't know what you don't know. You might have seen your parents and others drive, and then you get behind the wheel and what do I do now? And you go through that process of learning, which bits to press and which bits not to, and how to manage your your phone while you're doing all that. And, you know, it's kind of, think about it. There's 3 pedals most of the time. There's 7 stalks. There's people to talk to and things to look at. And
we've got to navigate, and we've got to be aware of other drivers on the road and what's happening at traffic lights and intersections.
How
and
do we
suddenly
ever
there's
learn?
all this information to process and deal with.
Yeah.
And now, for those of us that have been doing it for a number of years or decades, we can do it unconsciously.
Yeah.
And
I'd
like to say reasonably competently.
Yes.
I'm a great driver.
I'm a
You're
great
not.
driver.
No,
I'm a great driver.
No, I'm a great driver.
I'm a great driver. I've never met anybody who was an average driver.
Or at least would admit it.
No, yeah,
Yes.
exactly. And I think, so we do it unconsciously, which does explain a lot of the driver behaviour that we see on the roads.
Correct.
Except when something happens and then we're alert. But that's the point about our brains. If we had to go back to learning to drive every time we got in the car, it would be enormously expensive in terms of time and effort. So our brain, and here's one of the really important processes that we've been working on and building into our learning design, is the thing that gets us from that conscious incompetence, that, the bunny hops and the kind of, how do I actually steer this thing, and, remembering to brake and not going up to intersections too fast. Yeah. The thing that gets us to a smooth drive is repetition. And so one of the things in adult learning that we know in the 10-20-70, the 10% in the classroom, the 20% socialised, and the 70% in practice, is that the repetition piece has to happen in order for the retention. So you do a workshop on, for example, delegation skills. You spend a day doing it. Well, within about 11 days, you've retained perhaps 6% of what you heard. And what you hear, what you've retained, is actually just a matter, it's random. It's it's kind of whatever stuck. And so you go away with some version of what you were told in the workshop. So workshops, they have their uses, but not for learning skills. It's the repetition piece. And in the AMP program, that's how we've done it. We've kind of broken them down into micro-sized pieces about task delegation versus precision, and the way to do the delegation piece. Now practice this, practice. And as people practice it deliberately and mindfully, they get better at it until they don't have to think about it anymore.
And we talk about that learning doing gap.
Yeah.
And if we come back to the driving example, if we were with a driving instructor and they sat in the driver's seat and said, look, this is how you accelerate, this is how you brake, this is how you indicate, and then said, but don't practice it now, come back and see me in a month and we'll see how you go at it.
Yeah.
By the time you got back in a month's time, you're like, I can't even remember what you showed me.
Yeah.
And it's the same with our adult learning when we're going, we want to close that learning doing gap down to almost nothing if we can, where we're going straight from here's the content, here's the understanding, here's my interaction, my socializing of the learning, and then we want to get to practice straight away, because that's what helps us actually embed. And instead of only remembering 6% of what we're doing, we're up in the 80-90% of remembering what we do.
That spaced repetition is what it's called. It's been around since the late 30s, and it's well understood, but not really used in adult learning as well. There's a fascinating article, there's a white paper we did on it, the challenges with leadership development in the 21st century. The US, they spent $2 billion last year on leadership development, and the survey that these guys from Harvard did estimate they got a return on maybe 10% of that. So $1.8 billion wasted because of poor learning design. And the big problem is the gap between, we talk about the learning doing gap. Literally it means where you learn and where you do. And if there's some distance between them, that's where the learning falls down. So the idea is learning and doing have to be meshed. And again, in our design with the program, we've been very careful to make sure that there's nothing extraneous in terms of what they learn, and what they're learning is through doing. And it should be a struggle. It should always be a struggle. So one of the things...
So come back to that, but why is learning a struggle? Like if we put it in the management context, I'm trying to learn some new management skill.
Yeah.
I'm trying to get better at managing my team.
Yeah.
Why is the learning bit so hard?
It goes back to that piece about our addiction to the familiar. and the path of least resistance and our brain's objective of preserving energy. It takes effort to unlearn. Whatever you do now is a learning. You've got a way of managing people. It's not very good. It's actually not existent, but it's there. To learn something new on top of that, you have to kind of let that go and take on something new. And, there's a bunch of things that you need to have. You need to have a learning mindset, which a lot of the work that Carol Dweck did around growth mindset was built around these are skills that can be learned. So that's a great way of enabling learning. As a manager, getting your people to learn for yourself, enabling you to learn is these are skills that can be learned, because they are. They're all skills that can be learned. So getting that mindset piece right, having your own skill goals, so thinking about things in terms of process, not outcome, is really important.
Absolutely.
Really important, whether it's in sports or business or anything, is how you do that stuff. The only way to improve performance is to pay attention to the process and kind of carving that out, instead of saying, your sales results are crap and you beat people around the head, or you beat yourself up because you're not getting the results you want. Wrong kind of beating target.
Correct.
Look at the process. Where can you do the process better? And that's the kind of the active piece, the mindfulness piece.
Where can you do the process better, and then how can you bring effort to that process?
Yeah.
I think it's really, really key as well, because the effort piece, we can intellectually, I think we can go, I could think of a better process here.
Yeah.
But the effort piece, we can, it's a much lower energy option to default to habit and go back to what we already know. And I have the example working with our clients of going, have you ever had this experience where you've been really busy all week, and then you get to the end of the week and you go, I can't remember anything that I've done? That's because you've been operating out of habit.
Yeah.
You're just doing your normal cycle. You're doing what you normally, business as usual piece. And it's why when we start our program, and this is fundamental to our program, but it should be fundamental to any learning you're trying to do yourself or in your organisation, is we start with what we call our active versus reactive.
Yeah.
And simply put, that's about being very mindful about what you do. And that could be as simple as going, before you start your next task, whatever that is, stop, pause, think, is this next thing I'm going to do going to add the most value? Is it going to get me closer to my objectives?
Or even at a more narrow level, is this something that only I can do? Because if the answer is, well, actually somebody else could, then they should. And you should go and do something more valuable.
And you might think that sounds really easy to just go, oh, well, I'll just stop and think about what I'm going to do next. Yeah. You know what? You probably don't do it very well right now.
No.
You probably jump to the next thing in your inbox, or the next thing that someone calls out across the desk to you, or whatever is popping into your mind at that time.
Because you're in that reactive mode, a bit like the driving piece. You're kind of in the default setting, you're just cruising along. Your brain's not actually engaged. And you're just kind of in cruise mode. And then something happens and you respond to that. And that's actually how most of us operate most of the time. And you can't be in active mode all the time, because it's just you'd just be too tired.
Exhausting.
Yeah, it's just too tiring. You're actually having to concentrate, you're having to think. And as I say, the brain already uses 75%. That breathing function, that takes energy. It provides energy, but it also takes energy. The other, I guess, analogy I've got at the moment is estoy aprendiendo español.
Non comprendo?
No entiendo.
Oh, thank you.
I'm learning Spanish, and it's really interesting. I'm using an app called Mosolingua, and I observe the process. So spaced repetition. I've got to practice these cards. I'm doing it on the basis of kind of just learning these cards they give us and the words, and trying to work out the grammar from that. Right. And that's quite, you have to kind of induce, if it ends in O, then it's a masculine, and you just kind of work things out as you go. But the most important thing about any of that is I'm on a 104-day streak. So I started, and I've done it every day since then. And I will.
So just to be clear, you haven't been streaking for 104 days?
No, not
okay.
even one.
That's good.
Not even one.
That would have been.
Oh no, wait. No. Yeah, and so maintaining that momentum is a really important part of engaging that learning. Because if I leave it for a week, I've then got to go back and, oh my God, what was, where should we meet for a drink? What was that again? Oh, yeah. And you've got to dig back into it.
So if we talk about the learning ladder, those different, those 4 different phases, where would you say your learning of Spanish is at the moment?
Well, and that's the interesting thing about that ladder, because you can be in different parts,
Yes.
So a lot of it, I do not know what I don't know. So I don't know about grammar, and I don't know about tenses, and I don't know about all the kind of infrastructure. Now, actually you don't need to know too much of that. What they talk about mirrors what we know. They talk about the 80-20, which is a fundamental part of our program design. There are only a few things you need to know, and they have a disproportionate value. So that's our whole program. All the millions of business books we've kind of we've condensed into the few things, the vital few. So
I've got to rock out the quote because I love it. Not a lot matters, but what matters matters a lot. And I think that's a life saying, but it's also very important around learning as well.
Absolutely, yeah. There are a few things that if you get them, you've got them. You've got 80% of the value.
Can I order a beer? Can I find the bathroom?
La cerveza,
can I sleep somewhere tonight? Got those.
Yeah.
I think you can pretty much travel.
What are you doing here?
You can pretty much travel on those 4 things, can't you?
Yeah, pretty much. Pretty much. And and it's very clever the way they've kind of put a travel pack. These are the ones you're going to use for travel and so on. But the process of, so there's lots of things I don't know. There are some things I do know, and as I say them, I am conscious that I'm having to reach into my brain for, donde quieres, what was that one? No, you see, it's gone, right?
Yeah.
So under any kind of pressure, it goes.
And yet you'll have some things like hello, please, thank you, which just roll. So for those things, you're in conscious competence, where unconscious competence.
I'm then in unconscious competence.
On those things where it just flows out. You don't have to think about it as job done. And yet some of those other things, you're still in the learning phase. You're lower down the ladder.
Yeah, and with the slightest pressure, I'm then back into kind of having to think about it. So so you're in all those 4 quadrants at one time, and you're just continuing. But the wonderful thing is that there's some of them that I've really struggled with, and I had to repeat them, and they'd come up on the kind of learn, because what they do is they keep repeating these things in review until they're locked into your long-term memory. Right. And sometimes words, they throw up the English word and you go, it's that, and I haven't even thought about it. I've just gone, I think it's that must be it. And sure enough, la cerveza, beer. And la bocadilla, which is sandwich, which is also pretty important.
Indeed.
Yeah.
Priority statements.
Yeah. So 103 days and I can do beer and sandwiches, but I got a few others. But that sense of, the sense, again, in the learning, really important is that sense of progress. Now I do those reviews and I can go, I know that one. And I have a sense of, I'm getting on top of this. And I'm hearing myself, I'm hearing my pronunciation, thinking, that's pretty close to... A sense of progress, a sense of struggle, all of those things, that you're in any of that learning, it's got to be some struggle. There is mental effort, there is mental doing that's involved. It's not just you hear it, you know it.
Totally.
Because if you hear it and you know it, you haven't learned anything.
Correct. So I think in summary, let's think about some of the things people could focus on. The mindset you bring to learning, very important. Bring a growth mindset.
Well, let's step it back one.
Sure.
Whatever, we've been talking about kind of learning, and I guess the context for that is training. But let's talk about people who are listening to this and thinking about their own, whether they're business owners, managers, leaders, whatever. What are the kind of the steps in adult learning? And then you go, okay, first one, if you're trying to get a different result in your life, you need to learn to do something different. So how do you do that? Step 1. Absolutely. Create the growth mindset. These are skills that can be learned. You want to tattoo that on the inside of your forehead. It's kind of, these are skills that can be learned. We use that a lot, and it works. There's plenty of research that confirms how powerful that is. So, number 1, these are skills that can be learned. Second one would be, learning is a struggle. It requires mental doing. If it's not a struggle, you're not learning. Third one would probably be repetition. Repeat, rinse, repeat, rinse, repeat, rinse, until you've gone through that process from Consciously incompetent, I don't know what I don't know. Conscious incompetence, I do know what I don't know.
Yes.
Conscious competence, I know that I know. And then the last one, I don't even know that I know. I've got this one down pat. So you've got to go through that process. I think they're the kind of main steps, for people wanting to change anything in their life. They've got to learn what that looks like and learn to do that process that takes them somewhere else.
And that critical piece of trying to close that learning doing gap. So do your learning, do the practice, do your learning, do your practice, really, really close as possible.
Yeah.
And the only other one I'd add in is set a learning objective at the beginning. And make it something that's a stretch but achievable.
Yeah.
So if we use the Spanish example, you wouldn't go, I want to be fluent in Spanish in the next week. You might go, I would like to know 20 words in Spanish this week, and then that goal might change and reframe.
Our goal is, we want to go to Spain in 2021, and we want to be able to, have some conversations. So we've given ourselves a sort of, I guess a couple of years to get there. I think the other, kind of having a good motivation for doing that, I think is really important. What else is there?
Beer in Spain, that's quite a good motivation.
It's all.
Yeah, job done.
I'm not even sure about sandwiches. I think it's paella.
Yeah, there we go.
And tapas.
Yeah, so
practically perfect.
Good one. If you want to unlock the potential in your organisation, you really do have to create the learning organisation. To help follow some of these principles we've talked about. If you want to know more, please get in contact. We're only be happy to help share some of the insights and knowledge we have around this.
And if you want to unlock your own potential, it is going to be through learning something new. All the same principles apply.
The fact that people are listening to this podcast would be a good indicator that they are open, probably growth mindset.
Open-minded.
And willing to learn.
Growth mindset. Perfect.
Yeah. So, on that note, thanks for joining us.
Enjoy your day.
See you next time.